Antoine and Salvatore, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Stephan.
So I know you guys are both building out some stuff in Miniscript, obviously software and hardware. And I know this is an interesting area. There's been a bit of discussion about it, but there's also been some critique about it as well. So I'd be interested to, get into this with you guys. But maybe first, if we could start, what was your interest? Like, why did you get interested in this idea of Miniscript?
For me, it was starting working in Revault and actually having the responsibility of developing the project and tinkering with Bitcoin scripts and thinking, well, I'm not going to take the responsibility of writing Bitcoin scripts by hand, so I need a framework to do that safely.
Yeah. And for you, Salvatore?
And for me as well, it was kind of a natural extension of the work I was already doing to support multi-signature. Like when I was figuring out what is the best way of doing multi-signature, I figured out that a lot of the things that I was doing would actually generalize to more complex scripts, and because the possibilities of using more complex scripts have a lot of potential applications that we probably discuss, I thought that I should plan that from the beginning, from the get-go. And so that has been on the roadmap since, like, we already probably mentioned something like that on the episode last year, but now it's ready. So.
Yeah, fantastic. And so let's try to make sure we keep it accessible for people as well as we go. So let's just start with a very basic, what is Miniscript?
I'll leave this one to Antoine.
Okay. So Miniscript is a framework for writing Bitcoin scripts safely. So it was created by Peter Wöhler and Andrew Polstra, later joined by Senket Kanjalka. And essentially, it bridges the gap between what spending policy you want for your coins and what actually ends up being implemented in the Bitcoin script. So value transfers in Bitcoin works with these coins that are out there in the open, and each of these coins has a value and a small program that is attached to it. And the network is enforcing that anyone can spend these coins provided that they provide the data such as the program linked to the coin executes correctly. And Miniscript is going to provide you the tools in order to analyze this program. So it's going to analyze the spending conditions of the program, and also it's going to give you more information about it, such as the cost in resources. For instance, it's very important for pre-signed transaction protocols to know what's going to be the size of the spending transaction that you are pre-signing, because if someone can somehow inflate the size of the spending transaction, it could be a security issue because it could hinder the confirmation of this transaction. And also it's going to allow you to analyze whether this program will be spendable without third-party malleability, which is a good thing as well, more for the networks than for yourself, but it's interesting. And so what's really nice about Miniscript is that it's going to give you guarantees about this analysis. So I'm going to introduce it two main concepts that maybe a bit complicated, but really is on it. It's about consensus soundness and standardness completeness. So in Bitcoin, you have these rows, these consensus rows that are the network rows, and you have also some policy rows or standardness rows. The standardness rows are stricter than the consensus rows. And when we say that the spending conditions that are analyzed by Miniscripts, it guarantees that it's consensus sound, it means that there is no other way of spending this program, there is no other way of spending this coin, of satisfying this program than the one that Miniscript gives you. And standardness completeness tells you that all the spending paths given by Miniscripts are going to be spendable by standardness. Essentially, if you create a coin with this program, you're not going to get stuck and not be able to spend it. So that's it. There is no way around spending it otherwise from someone with bad intentions, for instance, and you're not going to get stuck.
Okay, so let me try to summarize and you tell me where I'm getting it wrong. So just for people who are like totally new or relatively new to Bitcoin, you might be used to sending a Bitcoin transaction, and we might think, oh, I'm just paying to an address, but really you're paying into like a script, and in order to spend out of that, you need to satisfy certain conditions. And in Bitcoin, that can be things like a time lock. That could be things like multi-signature, like multiple people need to sign. And it could be like who needs to sign. And so then what we're doing here with Miniscript, and this is, again, coming back to what was created by Peter Waller, Andrew Polstra, and Sankit, is this idea that we can more easily use complex scripting that already exists in Bitcoin today. But it's just, this is like the layer, this is kind of like a layer that helps us analyze and communicate it to each other, even if we're using different wallets. Like if I'm using a Ledger device and some other software wallet, or if I'm using a Spectre DIY, or maybe in the future a cold card, and that we can sort of speak the same language and more easily analyze the conditions. And so you were mentioning here the consensus soundness and standardness completeness. So you were saying with consensus soundness, you're saying that there's no other way to spend those coins than what you've spelled out in those policies. And in standardness completeness, I think you're saying that basically we're checking that you can spend out of it, that we're not kind of burning our coins, right? That we're putting them into some address that nobody can spend out of. No, actually, let's say we did a Miniscript today and that it needs, 2 out of the 3 of us, that those are valid and we can spend those coins so long as we meet the conditions, right?
And every branch, every spending condition encoded by the script is spendable and is valid by standardness. So all persons taking part into the scripts can spend as well. So I can't try to make a script with both of you guys, and then you just get stuck and I can blackmail you. If you analyze the scripts with Miniscript is going to tell you, yeah, it's safe for all 3 of you to get into this script.
I see. Salvatore, anything to add here?
Yeah, maybe the only thing I'll add to that is that Miniscript is not so much a feature for users directly, but it's more a feature for developers, because it enables, so Bitcoin already is programmable, because you can already program the way you want your money, your coins to be spendable. But Bitcoin makes that actually work in practice. So it will be possible to decide the spending conditions in practice, which is something that so far was always hypothesized, but never really done at a large scale, and never was easy to do.
I see. And so probably that comes into one of the criticisms, I guess you're touching on that as well, because some of the criticism I've seen online as well, my friend NVK has mentioned, he's saying, he's kind of said, all right, we're going to bring in Miniscript support into Cold Card, but it's probably going to be something that 2 users use, and what's the point of this anyway? Couldn't I spend that time doing more other things that are practical? So I'm curious if you have any views on that kind of criticism.
Yeah, sure. So the way I see Miniscript is that it enables a whole landscape of different things that can now be built on top, right? So while this can sound very complicated because there are so many possibilities, some of these will be advanced use cases, but some might be even very easy use cases. So Miniscript is not something that users will have to handle directly. And while initially, of course, the first deployments will be on advanced tools for people who are a bit more keen to experiment with new toys and new tools. But there are many use cases where you could actually make self-custody a lot easier than it is today. So the programmability becoming easier will enable both advanced use cases, but also very easy use case where you can help users to do things more easily than before. And we can cover this a little bit more later with some examples.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And one other area I'm sure people might be thinking, or they might be concerned, well, hang on, if I'm going to do all this Miniscript stuff, how do I verify that as a user? That, okay, my screen is telling me that it's a 2 of 3, but how do I know for sure that maybe there's not some, let's say the malicious attacker or the company is building in some unknown pathway that I don't know about? Like, let's say I think it's a 2 of 3 multisig with the 3 of us here, but actually this malicious company also has their own spend condition that they can just spend on their own. How do I as a user protect myself against that?
That's why the possibility to verify what you're signing, what you're doing with Miniscript on the screen of the device is crucial. In fact, when you are going to try to use Miniscript wallets on a Ledger device, the way it's designed is that before you start using this new wallet that uses Miniscript policies, you will have to inspect the policy itself, like the spending conditions. And so this could definitely be a point of friction for the user experience of the user. But this is something that you do only once when the wallet is created. While in all the future use cases, you'll be able to use the fact that you really inspected that policy, that maybe you give a name to that policy and you call it cold storage. And so the next time you use the policy, the device will just tell you you're spending from cold storage or you're receiving in cold storage. So definitely there are possibilities for friction there because these things are not necessarily easy to inspect for the user. But we are just starting. So of course there are ways of making these things easier for the user. And in the future, for example, we might figure out what spending policies are commonly used by people, and so have additional support in terms of UX for those specific policies, where you, instead of showing the Miniscript, which is a difficult thing to understand, you could name these policies in a more easy to understand language, for example. And so yeah, definitely there will be a lot of iterations on getting the best possible UX. But the only way we can get started is by deploying these tools in a way that is safe, and we start with advanced users.
Sure. And so maybe we can summarize that answer as there might be some well-known policies or well-known ways of executing this, and people just kind of stay into those well-known pathways. I mean, just like today when people they're operating in certain contexts where maybe they are using a specific kind of wallet, like maybe it's just a basic wallet, this kind of keep it simple, stupid. So on that topic then, could you explain for us what are some of the use cases that you could see people using Miniscript enabled tooling for? Like, is it inheritance? Is it decaying multisig or degrading multisig? What are the main use cases you guys see?
Yeah, maybe just to get back and the previous question, people nowadays don't check the scripts themselves on their signing devices. So if you take part, if you create a new address, you don't check the scripts. If you take part in the multisig, you are not going to check the raw Bitcoin scripts and the check multisig that is happening on your device. You're trusting the firmware of your device to have implemented these templates. And Miniscript allows you to do that, but it also allows the developers to use these templates and much more. And also it allows you, for instance, to analyze some Bitcoin script on your device and infer the semantic policy out of a raw Bitcoin script that would be unanalyzable for a regular user. To get back to the use cases, so obviously I'm biased on the inheritance here, but yeah, maybe something else is that we've done Revault with Miniscript. So it was with a time-locked path and time-locked multisig as well. It allows having time-locked recovery paths. It allows something just starting and some noise. Sorry. And also maybe what's very interesting about Miniscript is that it's composable. So let's say that the three of us want to get into some script of some sort, and that we say two out of us must agree to spending this coin. For now, we only think about it with one key per person, but it could be one policy per person. For instance, Stephan, you might want your personal policy to be a 2 out of 3 between 3 different hardware wallets. Myself, I might want to have some sort of co-signing with a company that I trust. And Salvatore might want to just have his own publicly on the ledger. And we can come together and compose these policies. And when we want to agree to spend this coin, we do our little things on our sides. Essentially, it makes everything more powerful and composable.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So we could also point out that it's like an interoperability thing. So as an example, if it's in a company context, you might have an individual, or let's say it's a senior person in the company who maybe has a personal wallet but that wallet can play multiple roles, right? It might be used in a personal context, but then it could also be part of a multi-sig for something related to the company as well. So I guess there's like an interoperability benefit. That's basically what your one idea you're getting at there, right?
Well, yeah, what you mentioned is using the same device in different setups. And what I was mentioning is more that let's say that you have a 2 out of 3 multisigs, and what I was saying is each of the keys is actually not a key, but a Miniscript itself. It's a script itself.
Gotcha.
And it could be a multisig inside a multisig. It could be a time-locked recovery multisig inside.
Yes. Sorry, you're right. I think I explained that poorly, but what I meant is like you could have your own personal setup, and in a way, the Miniscript is indifferent to whether I just had like one single device or whether I'm having a 2 of 3. Yeah. Actually, in the background, it doesn't really matter as long as I satisfy the condition. Yeah, exactly. The script doesn't care. Yeah. Okay. And so let's talk through some of those uses as well, because I think it would be valuable for people listening just to understand. Like, can you just talk through the inheritance idea? So let's say, as an example, you want to leave some coins to your son, but today you're still using those coins now. So could you just walk us through what does that look like from a policy point of view?
Maybe I'll mention a bit for this one, and then perhaps if Antoine wants to speak more about what they're building at Liana, because that's different. I could be overlapping use case, I guess. But one example that has been done many times for Miniscript is in fact inheritance, and the reason is that you could have a wallet that you're using on a day-to-day basis. But what happens, for example, if you are not able to spend your coins anymore? So that could be because you lost your key, or it could be because, unfortunately, people died. There was a recent talk in the conference in Prague about that from Daniela Brozzoni. And it was exactly about what things you can do to prevent your coins from being lost in case you die, right? And one thing you could do is that, if, for example, if you have 3 children, you could attach to your normal spending policy, which is just your hardware wallet, your key. You could say that after 1 year, 2 out of 3 of your children are able to spend your funds, right? So that's, in this way, they could automatically inherit the funds without having to go through any different kind of setup. Like past ways of handling that would be that you leave them the instructions somewhere. But of course, there are a lot more foot guns there, because someone might find out these instructions to access your seed, or like that becomes a very difficult problem on how to protect the seed, right? Yeah. And you can even go further. Like, what happens if 2 out of 3 of your children don't agree on how to split the funds? Well, then you could add another key, which is with the notary, and it's only active after 2 years, right? And so all these things become possible with Miniscript, and they become possible almost at no cost. Let's say.
Yeah. One question, just on that. Could you just explain, is that done in a relative time lock way or with an absolute time lock? So in this example, let's say you've got 3 children. Does that mean from the last time you spend, it's 1 year from then? Or it's an absolute time lock from the time you started the wallet?
Exactly. So Miniscript supports both kind of time locks. So you could say that some conditions become active at a specific time in the future, which is with the block number typically. Or you could say that if the coins don't move for a specific amount of time, then some condition becomes active. So in a case like this one that we just mentioned, if you want a condition to be active after 1 year, then you have to remember every once in a while to spend the coins by sending them to yourself so that you refresh the timer. Which is, of course, it's a possible source of friction, but this is also something that can be handled on the UX side from the wallet to remind you to do that, or that's something that definitely we can work in the future.
One other question there. Would that also blow up the transaction size, right? Because now we're dealing with a more complicated script. Does that mean you're paying more for every transaction to have that?
Not if you use Taproot. Well, much less if you use Taproot. But it's going to increase the transaction size, but it's less going to increase the cost of using it, because most of the data is going to be part of the witness data that is currently discounted. So it's going to increase the absolute transaction size, but the virtual size of the transaction is going to increase, but much less so. And with Taproot, even much less so, because you only have to reveal part of the script when you're spanning. This discussion between relative and absolute is something that has come up for Liana. And it's very interesting because also one drawback of using relative time locks is that they're limited to 1 year and a half, roughly. So the value of the time lock in blocks is only encoded in 16 bits by consensus, and so that's roughly 65,000 blocks. So the maximum time locks that you can use in relative is 1 year and a half. So that's large, but not so large if you want something very, very cold. And you can use absolute time locks there. Let's say if you want a 5 years time lock, you can use an absolute time lock, but then you have to redo your setup every time. Every time you have to recreate a new descriptor to register it on your same device. But hey, if it's only every 5 years, and also when you want to recover with relative time locks, since you don't receive your coins on your wallet all at the same time, they are not going to get to be available at the same time by the time you want to recover. So if your hairs are not technical and want to recover, maybe only part of the coins are going to be available at certain height, and for the rest of the coins they would have to wait even more blocks. So that can be confusing, and it's something that we are thinking about for Liana. And also for the use cases, so there is the inheritance. The obvious inheritance is I get one key and I give one key to my hair and it's time locked. Then there is the decaying multigs that Salvatore mentions, that you have, let's say, 4 out of 5 that degrades into 3 out of 5 that degrades in a 2 out of 5, let's say, and then maybe you introduce many more keys at the end, like after 1 year and a half, and you decide that after 1 year and a half is definitely not normal if you didn't spend the coins. You can say it becomes a 1 out of 10 with 10 keys that you would have given to many different people to do some kind of social recovery, maybe, because you just decide by this time, if I didn't spend it after 1 year and a half, it means that I basically lost it. So I better be trusting my friends or relatives than losing it completely. And that's also something that we're thinking about with Liana. Many people don't want to move from custodial services because of this very, very low probability that they have from losing their coins. So maybe something that we could do is that, okay, we're going to remove this possibility for you to from losing your coins by having this recovery time-locked key to us. That is, in any event, you trust us after 1 year and a half if you fuck up completely. But if you don't, you're always in total control. So you get from something that is fully custodial to something that is 99% non-custodial, but in the event of a total fuck up, you can still choose to trust the company. And I find this particularly interesting to bring more people to self-custody.
Yeah, so let me summarize that. And I think this is something that it may be controversial for some people, but it might also help more people self-custody. So it might be a debate point. But I think there will be some people out there who would otherwise want a custodian. And so this company, let's say it's a Bitcoin company, and they may want to have this kind of deep recovery key. And maybe it's, like you said, it's 1.5 years out, or maybe it's 5 years out. And so this, let's say the new or less kind of confident Bitcoiner or new Bitcoiner who's maybe not totally comfortable to be fully self-sovereign, they may like that comfort factor because they may say, oh, okay, I'm controlling the coins, but if I don't spend within, let's say 1.5 years or 5 years, then this company has a deep recovery key. So I don't lose the coins. I might just have to wait if I totally lost my keys. Now that may be controversial, but we'll see. Salvatore, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, another exciting use case is that because with multi-signature and with Miniscript, you can create policies where there are many keys that are participating in this policy, right? And so why that's interesting, because different keys can have different properties, for example, in how they're stored, how they are managed. And so, for example, one use case that I'm particularly interested about is imagine you're a company that actually uses already moved to the Bitcoin standard, so uses Bitcoin on a day-to-day basis, and so it has a spending wallet that they bring with them, right? So they will probably bring with them a hardware wallet, so they can spend from this wallet. And then in that case, because they use that in the field, they still have to be a little bit concerned about this hardware wallet being not hacked, but maybe someone guesses their PIN or they observe them while they're putting their PIN, and so they then later they steal the wallet, and so they manage to access their funds, right? And so one thing that you can do is that instead of using this as a single signature wallet, you could combine this with a second factor key that could be hosted on a different machine, either self-hosted or even by a service. And this key can be programmed, can be instructed to only sign according to the predetermined policies. For example, you could say to this service, well, only sign at most 0.1 bitcoins per day, right? So even if your primary key is stolen, then you can put some limits on how much the hackers will be able to steal. And then this you can again combine with additional recovery keys that are in deep cold storage, so that this can be done in a fully trustless way compared to the service, because the service is not able to spend these coins without your help, right?
Gotcha. Yeah. So it could be kind of like a corporate policy thing that it's like a rate limiter. So it's like rate limited on this way, but with the deep recovery keys, you can sweep the whole amount out into a safe setup, something like that.
And you could have different people in the companies that have different policies or different, and you can do this with different keys in different spending paths that you can all combine with Miniscript.
One other question I have is, there may be some privacy ramifications here if somebody wants to operate fully in this kind of Miniscript inheritance paradigm. Like, as an example, you may be a hodler who has got, coins from 10 years ago, and you may not want to spend or move those coins around. So are these Miniscript policies, are they going to apply at a UTXO level? And then so that means if you want to keep those policies active, you're now going to have to spend all of your coins and common input ownership heuristic, right? Because you're going to spend all of your UTXOs together. Does that mean you're kind of doxing a bit of your privacy to use this kind of thing?
So yes, simple answer is yes, but it depends. So if you are going to use legacy SegWit, let's say P2WSH, then you're going to reveal the script. And if you're using a time lock in your script, let's say, or if you're using a Miniscript at all, because most people don't, you are going to have a very, very small anonymity set. And even more so that you're choosing your time lock yourself. So that even the value of the time lock you can actually stick out. If you're using Taproot, you're not going to show on-chain that you have this hidden recovery path until you actually need to use it. So most of the time, it's not going to be shown on-chain. And I think what you the question was about the patterns of cycling the coins in order to recycle the relative time locks to restart the clock, essentially. Yes, you could see some patterns that someone that is recycling their coins, but they don't have to merge all the coins themselves. So it's a trade-off between paying more transaction fees and using one or two coins per transaction. But yeah, definitely you could see a pattern in the future if people are recycling coins. Mm-hmm. But also,
and is there any thought? Yeah, go on.
Sorry, but also what's very interesting so it opens up a lot of questions about a lot of areas of Bitcoin developments of using all these new scripts. For instance, with coin selection. So we don't have, for now in Liana, we don't have automatic coin selection, but we're thinking that during the coin selection process, we're going to have a bias towards older coins so that you don't have to actually do recycling transactions yourself. But when you're spending, you're just spending the older coins, so it recycles themselves, and you break these patterns that could be identifying you.
Yeah, so this almost brings in a new paradigm, right? Because I think historically, at least in the coin control and coin selection world, it was sort of like there were, as an example, people like Merch, right, who will talk about optimizing fees, and he has this branch and bound algorithm, and it's kind of like you're either optimizing fees, or some in the privacy world are saying, no, like do it all about privacy, and you should you should be very careful which coins you spend and which ones you merge and all of that. So it's almost like now we've got a third paradigm now. We've got this third paradigm that you may be optimizing for functionality, because your tap script or your Miniscript is now dictating which coins you will actually choose to spend, because I might have this old coin that's about to hit a degradation, and I need to spend that now because I want to keep it in my control, as an example.
Yeah, but you could see this functionality as just being future fees. You know that you're going to have to recycle this coin anyhow in the next 6 months, so you might as well spend it now that you need to make an actual payment, than pay the fees of an entire transaction, an additional transaction in the future.
I see. So there's maybe some ways you could be opportunistic about it and be like, oh, I was going to spend anyway, I might as well just build in my recycling transaction to the same spend, and therefore my wallet is kind of keeping me in compliance over time, or keeping me in the state that I want it to be in. And now that's probably also going to be an interesting challenge from both a software and a hardware perspective, because then it kind of, it's like, how do you remind that user? Like, does the wallet tell you, oh, Stephan, your coin is going to come up, you need to recycle it now, hit this to recycle? Like, how does it work?
Well, we have a UX bugs. I don't know. I wouldn't know how to call it, but we have an alert on Liana and the UI is telling, there is only 10% of your time lock duration that is left. You might want to spend this coin to restart the time lock, or the recovery path is going to be available. But surely there is a huge space for UX and UI optimization from Bitcoin designers and I'm far from being knowledgeable about it. But we could use help on this side, definitely.
Yeah.
Salvatore, but specifically, I do think that because the design space is so big, the biggest challenges are actually on the software wallet side. There are some specific challenges for hardware wallets that we can touch base later if you want. But yeah, really the UX issue around these things, and also especially when they combine with things like optimizing privacy, I think they will fall mostly on the software wallet user. And that's why actually hardware wallet support is so important, because it removes the bottleneck that has been so far in trying out these things in the wild. So, yeah.
And I think another area that might be interesting is, of course, there's going to be commercial services around this. And of course, in Bitcoin, there's a strong open source ethos. Is there going to be a possibility for people to self-manage, right? Like to not have to use a provider and be able to, like, obviously today we have, various node in a package, right? Umbrel and Raspberry Blitz and all of those. Maybe this could be like a module that, it's like your little self-hosting module that if you wanted to run it for yourself and not have to, because here's an example. Like, what if there's like some decaying multi-sig and a company goes bust, or the company, that you were relying on as a service provider, they're not there anymore. Now what?
Yeah, that's why there's this property of Miniscript that you can compose or add additional spending policies is so important. And especially on Taproot, adding an additional spending policy for emergencies comes almost at zero cost, meaning unless you use it, you don't pay for it. And so in this way, you could always add additional keys that you only use for recovery if the main keys that you expect to use in most cases are not available. And related to something that we touched before for privacy, actually, there is one nice property of Taproot that, without getting too technical into how Taproot works, but the way Taproot transactions work is that you combine one spending policy, which is just one key, together with an arbitrary number of policies that are scripts. And so scripts could be Miniscript, for example, right? And the nice thing is that actually, because of the properties of Schnorr signature algorithm, you can replace any key with some complicated protocols that do basically multi-signature, but only using one key on chain, right? And so this is nice because in many of these multi-party signing protocols, if all the parties that are participating, they know if you are able to use one of the spending conditions, right? And so in that case, if you intend to use one of the spending conditions, as long as the participants are available and are online, they can just cooperate with you to use the main spending condition, which is the key path. And so these scripts will never be revealed on chain. So this has huge implications for privacy. And while it will take a long time to develop, that's the end goal of where all this is going, in my opinion, to have these spending conditions that, they are able to condition how the coins can and will be spent, but in most cases they will not have to be revealed on chain.
Yeah. One other concept that would be interesting, just from what I was reading, there's this term descriptor templates. So can you tell us what is that and why is that useful here?
The idea of using descriptor templates or something like that has been kind of rediscovered over and over in many different settings. For me, in this idea that I'm developing of what I call wallet policies, the idea came out while I was trying to support multi-signature in the best possible way for Ledger hardware wallets. But then, while realizing that the same problems would apply more generally to Miniscript, then I try to make it completely independent from the specific application and make it fully general so that it will work for an arbitrary policy, right? And so the problem that it tries to solve is the following. There is this language called output descriptors that is basically able to describe all these spending policies that you can use, and you can combine that with Miniscript that basically extends output descriptors. And so this allows interoperability because any software that understands descriptors will now be able to understand how these spending policies work, how these things should be signed, and how these things will work on chain and so on, how to estimate the fees for this transaction and all the necessary things that wallets need to do. But the problem is that, so there are a few problems though. Output descriptors are a very general language, and so they are a bit too general, meaning they can describe sets of scripts that are not how typical software wallets actually manage the wallet accounts. For example, if you take the typical wallet, let it be single signature or multi-signature, the way they handle these scripts is that they generate basically two sequences of possible scripts that correspond to their addresses. And those are the receiving addresses and the change addresses. The receiving addresses are the addresses that you will give to someone who wants to send you money. And you try always to give a new address because otherwise people can basically, you will leak some information about how you use money and people would able to link payments, right? While the change addresses are basically addresses where you send money back to yourself, because without getting into how exactly the UTXO model works, but when you spend some coins, you always have to spend them in full. And so if you don't have a set of coins that matches exactly what you want to spend, what you do is that you send whatever is the amount you want to send to your destinatary, to the receiver, and then you send some money back to yourself. And those go into these change addresses, right? And so what a software wallet considers an account is basically a chain of these two chains of addresses, basically. Yeah. And so wallet policies kind of build on top of descriptors and Miniscript by creating a standard language that software wallets can use, and it's very close to descriptors. So it's very easy to convert from wallet policies to descriptors, or from descriptors to wallet policies that are supported. And by kind of forcing the pattern that anyway wallets are using nowadays, you avoid using scripts that are not following these patterns unless you have specific reasons to do it. And another reason that another thing that wallet policies tries to address is that more specific to the usage of these things in hardware wallets. And so, as we mentioned before, when you use wallet policies, and this is already true for multi-signature, when you start using these policies, you need to be able to verify on the hardware wallet exactly how the policy looks like, and so that you know exactly what you're doing. And the reason that's important is that your computer might have some malware, And if the computer has malware, they could change the policy. And so for the hardware wallet, it's not enough to verify that your key is in this policy, because if the malware had changed the policy, they could control more keys than you, for example. And so, or even in a multi-signature, they could control enough keys so that you are unable to spend your funds. And so in this way, they could ransom you to say, hey, if you want to see your Bitcoin again, you give half to me, right? And so to prevent this kind of attacks, you need to be able to inspect policies exactly on the screen of the hardware wallet. So one of the things that wallet policies the standard that I'm trying to propose of wallet policies tries to do is to make these descriptor templates as short as possible, and also to separate the descriptor templates that kind of specifies the structure of the policy from the public keys, which is another thing that is also part of the wallet policy, but it's easier to inspect these two things separately. So when you register a wallet policies on a Ledger hardware wallet, you will first inspect the descriptor template, which is the policy, which is the structure of the policy, which is like a multi-signature 2 out of 3, or a second factor between my key and some other key, right? And then on a separate step, you will inspect exactly what are the public keys. So one or more of these public keys will be your own pub keys, while some other keys will be from other parties or from some service or something. And so yeah, I'm proposing that as a standard because I believe it solves problems that any hardware wallet implementing these things would have. And plus it makes it a natural language to agree on a common ground for all the software wallets.
I see, yeah, because as I understand some of the critiques, and maybe going back to what NVK from CoinKite was saying, is he was saying there's all this complexity here. And so they want to build something safe. They don't want to put their customers into, as I'm sure you don't either. Nobody wants to put their customers into like a dangerous position, but then that means there's a lot of work on the manufacturer, the software engineer to make sure it's safe. And if there's all this complexity in there, but I can understand from your perspective, you're saying this is actually something that maybe it helps ease some of that, or at least make it easier to assess what is, if I'm the user, what am I signing and what am I saying yes to, and hopefully not being susceptible to a ransom or some other kind of malicious signer attack there. So could we talk a little bit about what it looks like from a software side as well? So Antoine, could you just walk us through what does it look like on, let's say today on Liana, what does it look like today when you want to set up Miniscript?
Yeah, maybe just again to get back and what you just mentioned about the complexity, it's important to remember that it's Bitcoin that is complex and Miniscript that makes it safer to use. It's not the other way around. We're not making things more complex by introducing Miniscript. We make them bearable. So it's in two parts. Mainly, you have to first create your output descriptor, which supports Miniscripts, and then you can use your wallet. So typically, you would run Liana. It would pop up what we call an installer, where you have to choose the spending policies that you want for your wallets. For now, we only support one primary key and one timelock key. So the installer is very simple. You just plug, let's say, your first signing device, get the XPub from the signing device in the installer for the primary key, get the XPub for the secondary key, the timelocked key, the recovery key, and you choose the number of blocks before the recovery key becomes available. And then you just go through the steps. It checks your connection to your Bitcoin D and everything that is a regular wallet would do. And then you get to the installer. And you can also, from the installer, import a descriptor that you would have created on another wallet and recover from a descriptor. And you can, let's say, if you're recovering from your backup, you input the descriptor, you take your recovery key, and you can sign a recovery transaction. In the future, and that's one of the big UX challenges that we're going to face, the installer is going to get much more complex because even as of end of the month, we're going to have the release of multisig. So you will be able to use multiple keys in each of the two paths. So multiple keys as primary keys and multiple recovery keys. And then in the future, we're going to have multiple paths. So you can have multiple keys and more than two paths, time-locked paths, for instance, for indicating multisig. And it becomes quite a mess on the installer if you just put everything on it, and not very understandable for the user.
Yeah. And so just on Liana then, is the idea that you can, like, the main wallet is like a hot wallet and then the recovery key is like a hardware signing device? Or like, can you just walk us through what you're currently able to do and what you're planning to do?
Currently, we only support signing devices in Liana. We don't have any hard keys support. We are going to add it for the next release that is coming up for the end of the month. So the next release is going to have multi plus hard keys. I see it mainly as just make it easier to test it, but you probably don't want to use hard keys for any substantial amounts anyways. So.
Yeah, fair enough. And Salvatore, can you tell us a little bit? I'm not sure if if this is built into Ledger Live yet, or is that coming? Could you tell us what it looks like in Ledger Live?
No, at this time it's not planned to integrate this feature in Ledger Live. It's more like supporting something for the ecosystem,
Gotcha.
and then let people build new things. And
Gotcha.
one of the exciting things is that because the design space is so big, like we already mentioned a bunch of applications, we could mention more, and I'm sure 1 year from now we can look back and people have implemented maybe 10, 20 different use cases that we didn't think about. Like one example is, like a few months ago, I learned, there is this company, Anchor Watch,
Rob Hamilton's one,
right?
Rob One
From
Ham,
Rob
yeah.
Hamilton, yeah. And so they were building something to do, insurance on Bitcoin, right? And they learned about Miniscript, and they just figured out themselves that with Miniscript they can do stuff that is useful for their use case, because since they are doing insurance, they can tell the users that they will do insurance on their assets, but they want them to custody their assets with specific ways, with specific policies, right? So this is not something that I will ever think about, but people will find use cases for these things, and people will build useful things. That's my point.
Yeah, so I could see use, as you mentioned, insurance. Obviously, they might want to use that to help de-risk the way coins are stored. It could be applied in a corporate context, right? As we've mentioned, the corporate or business context where multiple people need to have access to coins. It could also, like you mentioned, inheritance. Maybe even a family. Maybe a family might want, like, maybe not today, but, let's say after this has been built out, a family may want to do some kind of Miniscript policy together, and then that way jointly manage their coins.
Or the simplest thing, how do you defend yourself from a $5 range attack, right? You can send coins to a wallet that you control, but you cannot spend for a year. That's very simple.
Right. So you can have like a panic button, right? You can sort of have I'm under attack.
If you really don't plan to spend most of your assets, you could leave 10% out and send 90% to a wallet that you yourself cannot spend for a year.
Right.
Yeah, but
That's an interesting idea. And then, I don't know, maybe you would have some kind of emergency unlock with multi-sig and things like this.
Exactly. Antoine is not convinced.
But then what if I come with a branch and I make you pre-sign the transaction that is going to be valid in 6 months, and then it's basically a race between me in 6 months and you?
Well, that's because since you use Taproot, you can hide another spending condition on the script tree with a different key that has a shorter time lock.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Well, actually, on that, let's talk a little bit about the Taproot aspects, because as I understand, Miniscript was pre-Taproot, right? Like, it was created pre-Taproot. So what's going to change in a Taproot context? I know we've mentioned it across our conversation, but if you could just summarize for people, what are the Taproot implications of having Miniscript?
So you're going to afford using much bigger scripts. You're going to afford from a privacy budget, let's say, using actual complex scripts, because you're not going to reveal them. And I think it's the main point of using Taproot for a regular user, is that you can have all these hidden paths, spending paths that you would only use in case of emergency. But also technically it removes a lot of the bounds that were present on the legacy scripts, such as the maximum numbers of operations that can happen in a script. So you can afford having larger scripts, and it also removes some malleability vectors in the script by making some rules that were only standardness rules that were enforced by most nodes in the network, but that were not part of Bitcoin, by actually enforcing them by consensus. So we can rely on them within the script. And so, yeah. If I didn't miss anything,
interesting, because I saw some of the haters were saying Taproot was not really doing much or adding much to the network, but I mean, this is an obvious case where maybe there's actually new functionality being brought by Taproot. So, you know, the Lightning guys they're looking to use Taproot, and I know Laolu and the Lightning Labs team are looking to have Taproot channels, and they're working towards that. And this is another example where Taproot is actually bringing a new functionality that could bring all these new features or make it more feasible for people to do. So, but I mean, the jury's still out. Like, you know, we still need to see companies actually building out and making these things. But I think it's an interesting example of actually, here's an actual Taproot benefit.
Yeah, I have no doubt that use cases on Taproot will flock soon, as soon as the tooling is built, and people expecting Taproot usage to grow before the tools are built. Like, well, there is no reason to switch to Taproot before the tools are built. You can do the same things on SegWit.
Yeah. Okay, so looking forward, like, do you have any other ideas on where you would like this to go? Is there any other directions that we haven't mentioned so far that you think, or any other important points that you think about this that we haven't covered?
So it's a slippery slope because I don't know much about it, but I guess I'm interested, and that's something that we were discussing just before the show with Salvatore. I'm interested in how Covenant would be integrated into Miniscript. So on this side, if some of the more technical listeners want to have a look, Andrew and Senket have an extension of Miniscript for liquids, well, for elements, and that takes into Miniscript some of the introspection primitives that are made possible by the Elements scripting system. That's interesting. Basically, you could say in your Miniscript, you can only spend immediately, but as long as the output at the second index in the spending transaction has this value, or that you can only spend after 6 months if you spend with a transaction that, I don't know, has a single input. So you can introspect in the spending transactions. That's interesting. But that relates also to other Covenants proposals. What are the limits? What can really be encoded into a descriptor for Covenants? For instance, I'm not sure if all the information for math for the proposal of Salvatore could be encoded in a single descriptor if we need more powerful language for this, or yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting thing with descriptors, that we are implementing descriptors today, but it's not something that it's set in stone, meaning we can always add new features. We can always like, if a future soft fork adds new features to Bitcoin, then you could expand the auto descriptor language to implement these new features. And so having this language already available will make it a lot easier to extend the language and roll out new features. Because there's always been a pain point, like from the switch from the legacy to SegWit, from the switch from SegWit to Taproot and so on. Every one of these upgrades has always been very slow in adoption because it was very long and time consuming to build the tooling. While I think now we are getting to some solid foundations that are much more easy to extend and much easier to adopt.
Okay, great. So yeah, let's just summarize. Like, we've gone through a lot of stuff, and I know this is probably a bit more of a technical episode, so hopefully people might have to kind of go back over. But let's just kind of quickly give a high level summary here, right? Like, Miniscript is this way of making it easier to assess and interoperate between wallets in terms of Bitcoin scripting. And make it so that maybe you're less likely to have like a vendor lock-in, right? Because you can have Miniscript and it's like cross-compatible in a way. So that's useful. That's handy, and it makes it easier for engineers and entrepreneurs to build something out that would have previously been too complicated, or maybe that was in a too hard basket before. Whereas now with Miniscript, some of these ideas become feasible, and maybe it makes it easier to do this inheritance planning, time locking, business context. So I guess that's kind of how I would summarize it. Do you guys have any other, closing thoughts? Why should listeners care?
Closing thoughts, maybe something that we didn't touch on, but that's important. Output descriptors, even less and especially less technical listeners should look into output descriptors. It's a way of making your backup explicit, because the recovery process in Bitcoin is not only about being able to sign for a coin, it's about being able to locate the coin in the first place in the UTXO sets. When I took this analogy of the value transfers in Bitcoin being just coins in the open with value and a program attached, there is about 80 million of these coins currently. So if you do not know in what script your key was used, your key backup is useless. And currently we rely on implicit information. It's good enough in most situations, but when we are talking about people's money, most is not enough. It's output descriptors a way of making these backups explicit, so that you know where your key was used, and you have your private key to sign for the coins that you located with the backup. So yeah, closing thoughts, look into backup output descriptors, and try out Liana. And we need designers for Liana. It's going to be a mess for the installer.
Salvatore?
Yeah, my closing thoughts. So we all got excited listening to Andreas Antonopoulos mentioning how Bitcoin is programmable money. And I think Miniscript changes that from programmable in theory to programmable in practice. So Bitcoin companies, I think everybody should look at Miniscript and what Miniscript can do for them.
Fantastic. Well, thank you guys for joining me. I'll put all the links in the show notes. So thanks, Antoine and Salvatore.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.